Hello, and welcome to the September tarot reading. Summer is winding down. Many children are back in school already. For this month's tarot, there were many questions to choose from, and I ended up asking myself, what are the basics of life here and now? And so from there, I decided to look into money and government. And then I also decided to continue tracking the attitudes and the perspectives of the people in general. So back in July, I asked the question, how can we continue evolving ourselves? And I drew the Five of Cups, signaling that we were caught in sorrow, anxiety, crying over spilt milk, and we were spiritually exhausted. So this spiritual exhaustion really bothered me. So in August, I asked, what's happening with the spirit of the people? And the Five of Cups fell out of the deck again as I drew the Three of Wands. So the presence of that Five of Cups for a second month in a row told me that we were still in that sorrow, but we're in the closing stages of that sorrow, exhaustion, anxiety, and we're now beginning to turn our backs on the past as we looked out at this golden sea of possibilities at a distant shoreline. So what came up for September showed a very coherent and continuous progression of where humanity is at with themselves. So let's begin. The three specific questions asked were, number one, how are the people feeling, thinking, and seeing, and what would be most helpful for us to see about ourselves? Question number two was, what can we expect regarding our money and our financial system? And question number three, what do we need to see regarding our government and constitution? So the cards drawn were in, for question number one, how are we thinking? What would be helpful for us to see about ourselves? And the card drawn was the Devil, number 15 in the major arcana. The card drawn in answer to the second question about the financial system was the Ten of Swords. Oh my. And I actually drew two cards for question number three about our government and our Constitution. And I got the Eight of Cups for government and the Three of Cups for the Constitution. So let's go into these. Question number one, how are the people feeling, thinking, and seeing, and what would be most helpful for us to understand about ourselves? And the card drawn is the Devil. So if this is the answer to how people are feeling and thinking, if this is the answer to the question, what would be most helpful for us to understand about ourselves? The Devil card is quite a wake-up call. Oh my. There's almost too much in this card to get your mind around. This card symbolizes being tossed around on the horns of a dilemma, a big dilemma, a problem, a challenge that must be met. It warns that what was hitherto surging under the surface is now visible. And that is both a challenge and the advantage. Let me say that again. What was hitherto surging under the surface is now visible. In other words, what used to be hidden is now visible. And that is both a challenge and the advantage. So this is the card that says a taboo has been crossed. And we are now aware of something that must be faced. So when you look at the card, you see a horned creature with bat wings sitting on a small black cube or box. His legs are hairy like goat legs. His feet are like bird's feet with talons. And in front of him are two small figures, a male and a female. The humans are naked, and they're chained by the neck to the small black box. Both humans have a tail, with the tail on the end of the female ending in a cluster of grapes, and the tail on the male ending in fire. So the background is black, and the devil card here, that and that background represent torment. Torment. The black box symbolizes the material world and its many demands, and the people chained to the box represent the human race being captive, treated as beasts of burden, forced to make the physical world work without them ever seeing what's inside the box or understanding the hidden mechanisms in the whole system. However, the chains around their neck are loose, and they could easily free themselves if they chose to. Since our question is, how are people feeling and thinking, and what do we need to understand about ourselves? This card tells us that we need to free ourselves. What would we be freeing ourselves from? Well, devils symbolize a kind of vampire-like energy, sucking the blood out of us. The devil card has another meaning that is very pertinent to our question. It symbolizes the deprived child. That part of us that we have locked in the basement, kept in the dark, and neglected to care for. It's the side of us that we do not want to express because it might not be nice, or it would get us in trouble with mama and daddy. This card says we are beginning to bring this deprived child out of the basement and into the light, where he or she can grow and be integrated into life, bringing a whole new quality of life to our lives. An even more astonishing aspect of the devil card is the task associated with it. That task is to acknowledge and fashion whatever remains of our primordial nature. Let me read that again. That task is to acknowledge and fashion whatever remains of our primordial nature. In other words, the devil represents what we become when we fail to continue evolving into more expansive states of consciousness that allow us access to higher dimensions of existence. We become our own worst enemy, keeping ourselves chained to a way of life that's difficult at best and hell on earth at worst. Our primordial nature is to continue expanding. It's to move beyond the material realm to a world of energy and light, and to use that energy and light as the basis for our reality system. Are we working on that? The horns, which are meant to be like antennae, used to tune ourselves to the light and the love, the gracefulness and wisdom that are out there. Instead, those horns are curved downward toward the lower frequencies. This indicates that we are remaining in an immature state, living in an unrefined world of torment, and caught in unproductive communications between ourselves, between and among us, instead of reaching for information that would move us into a world of light and the kinds of governance, healing, technology, business, art, science, et cetera, that are made possible by that light. The bat wings are meant to remind us that we know how to fly in the dark, to navigate without bumping into things and destroying ourselves. The fact that the wings extend far outside the boundaries of the card tells us that we are able to navigate a much broader landscape than we might suspect. And the torch in the devil's hand means that we are to bring light and passion into our lives. What are we passionate about these days? Is our passion misplaced? The bird's feet are reminders that we are meant to fly, which means that we're meant to move into much higher realms of consciousness with a spirit of adventure and creativity. And the talons tell us we need to hang on to what we think is best for us. This is backed up by those hairy haunches of the goat legs that tell us two things. Legs are the symbol of our stand in life, our position in the daily give and take of things. And the hair or the fur symbolizes our thoughts, our ideas, our prejudices. Are we making life difficult for ourselves because we insist on maintaining a world that we are meant to grow beyond? The devil's head is shaped like a triangle, and that triangle points downward. Although this is a warning against negative thoughts that pull us down, it's also, the triangle is a symbol of the need to be grounded, to be practical, to acknowledge what's happening, quote, on the ground without falling into a pit of fear and negative expectations. It tells us to face and fix what is not working, and to do so using a bit of light from the torch. The devil's right hand is up, almost as if in greeting, and it's fully open with some kind of symbolic lines on it. This represents that we are now seeing the hand that we are being dealt. And it's up to us to decide how to move forward. It symbolizes that our lives are in our hands, and we must chart the path for ourselves. We can no longer remain in the position of the dependent child. So that is then backed up by the grapes on the woman's tail, which represent the nurture and the abundance of life, as well as the wine of life that alters consciousness. Wine is meant to alter consciousness. The fire on the tail of the man is the capacity to transform not only the self, but the entire reality. So the bottom line here is a familiar message. We bedevil ourselves, which means to cook ourselves, cook our own goose. If we fail to grow and continuously improve the reality we are in. Since we are the ones creating that reality, it's nobody's fault but our own if we let things go badly. The devil can also appear as someone or a system that is power hungry and seeks control over others, often because of thinking that goes something like this. We know better. We are the greatest, the most powerful people in the world. However, the devil card carries the stark warning, pride goes before a fall. I'm sure you've heard that before. It warns us that humility is lacking, and we are likely to become the victims of our own obsessions, greed, ignorance, and inability to see that we are exploiting others and being exploited in return. When we allow that kind of exploitation to go on, we borrow from our future. We mortgage our future. So keywords to keep in mind for the devil card are weakness, blindness, deprivation, ravaged, violence, fatality, extremism, loss of spiritual bearings, dependency, uncivilized, unrefined, and the need to follow the instinct to move toward the light. It's a card that heralds a need for inner transformation in order to avoid destruction. And it calls for a touch of humor to help balance the situation. And in closing, I would add that it hints that the next 15 weeks may be a time when we are dealing heavily with what is in our face. So that's the end of question number 1 regarding how are we doing as a people? What do we need to see about ourselves? Question number 2, what can we expect regarding our money and our financial system? And the card drawn is a 10 of Swords. So when I drew this card, my immediate reaction was, well, looks like September is going to be an intense month. This card is a pretty blunt statement about our money and financial system, and there are some very interesting aspects to the situation. It also means out for the count, down for the count. And I thought the use of the word count in the light of the fact that we are dealing with money, which has to be counted and which we count on to survive, is one very interesting coincidence. Are we to expect that something is going to change or take down our ability to count our money? The other interesting factor is that has to do with this suit of swords. The 8, 9, and 10 of Swords indicate a process of transformation has been in progress and is about to launch into a new dimension. Okay? The 8 of Swords represents the beginning of the process, the spinning of the narrative or the new story or whatever it is that's taking shape. The 9 of Swords represents attaining maturity while remaining hidden. Attaining maturity while remaining hidden. And the 10 of Swords represents the final step in that process, the successful launch into a new dimension. In many ways, it looks like this is referring directly to the launch of a new financial system. So let's continue. When looking at the card, we see a figure lying face down in the sand with 10 swords run right through him. From the top of his head to the bottom of the trunk of the body. He's wearing a red cloth over a brown tunic, and his right hand is displaying the sign of a blessing. He's lying on the edge of the water, and the sky is black above him. However, off in the distance, you can see a very bright yellow sky on that horizon. Swords are the suit of the intellect, of our mental abilities, and the messages of this card are several. The most powerful message is that we are about to face something that will bring to fruition all of our thoughts, attitudes, fears, and worries around the subject of money and the financial system. The 10 of Swords symbolizes the fear of ruin and, quote, being nailed by what we have been thinking and talking about. In other words, what we think and what we talk creates. So this card warns us that something is about to occur that will lead to thoughts of betrayal and will challenge us to the core. Have we betrayed ourselves by expecting a financial crash? Can we imagine a bigger challenge than the challenge to survive without money? The next message is that when we see this manifestation occur, this ruination, our only reasonable response has to be love and devotion to one another, because any other response will result in destruction due to our insistence on hanging on to old ideas, old fears, old judgments, and illusions, even when they result in disaster. This indicates that what happens with our money and finances will feel like a life and death test for us. And the reminder seen in that red cloth is to let ourselves and our lives flow forward, taking care of the business of life. The brown tunic symbolizes business. So let me repeat, taking care of the business of life is our task, along with taking care of the next generations as if they were the lifeblood of our civilization, because they are. So the intense contrast between the black and yellow in the sky points to massive problems and tensions. This indicates a storm is brewing in our financial world. If we are to lessen the impact of that storm, we will have to change our outlook and our behaviors. And that will require dropping the angers and facing the problems squarely with an attitude of what needs to be taken care of here. So, since swords often represent the negative side of the mind, its alienation from nature, and the kind of thinking that chases after idols while engaging in useless or destructive habits, this warns us that letting go of old expectations is critical. We may have to mourn the past, but if you note the right hand of the figure pinned to the earth, that right hand indicates the sign of a blessing. Do we need to see the old money coming down in order to get rid of the corruption? Is that the hidden blessing? Will this reveal something we have all been hoping for? Will it teach us something invaluable and prove to be a blessing in disguise? This card says yes. It also says that anything happening to our money system may be anticlimactic because we have all thought it would be so much worse than it actually turns out to be. Keep that in mind. The Ten of Swords is known as the Lord of Ruin, the card that represents the time of, quote, end results due to thinking that is divorced from reality. End results due to thinking that is divorced from reality. It symbolizes mental processes used to disrupt common sense. Are we in charge of our mental processes? Are we buying into something that is being fed to us in order to convince us that a new money system is needed? If this is true, would that new money leave us better off or worse off? Keywords for this card are ending and transition, conflict, justice, fears, desolation, power, closure, ruined plans, an undesired ending, darkness before the dawn, wrath, restless, empty chatter, and authority. This card presents us with the challenge to look at the whole situation from every angle and begin to synthesize the whole picture. We are to integrate the polarities, the oppositions, the fears, needs, and the possibilities while learning as many lessons and as much wisdom as possible from our experience. Above all, we are to avoid thinking that says, that will never work, and to discover the thinking that leads to that new horizon under the yellow sky where a whole new world begins to take shape, a world of our own making. So that's the end of question number 2. Question number 3, what do we need to see regarding our government and constitution? And I drew the 8 of Cups for the government half of that question, and the 3 of Cups for the constitutional part. of that question. So we've seen the Eight of Cups a couple of times this year, once in March in response to a question about extraterrestrials, and again in May in response to a question about the future of big cities. And now here it is again in response to the question regarding government. And as I mentioned, the Three of Cups was drawn in order to differentiate between government and our Constitution. So let's see what these two cards have to say about our topic. The Eight of Cups shows a figure dressed in red coat and red boots, walking away from us along the edge of a rocky river. The river runs off into the distance and disappears into a ravine. That ravine is formed by two mountains. There's a sun and a moon in what appears to be a nighttime sky. The figure has a walking stick or staff, and he's walking away from the 8 cups that are stacked 2 rows high with uneven spacing in the very forefront of the card. Now, there are 2 core messages and 1 great task that comes with this card. One message is, and this is going to sound familiar after that Devil card, we must come to terms with our own destiny, which is being created by us. So personal responsibility is indicated here. We must come to terms with our destiny. The other message is, go where your heart takes you, which means we must follow our passion. Go where your heart takes you. And the task that's associated with this card couldn't be more appropriate for our question about government. And the task is that we must begin to exercise our influence. And since this part of our question concerns what we need to see regarding our government, the task would be to begin to make our wishes known, to make our feelings count, and to exercise our ownership of our government, for it is our government. Red is the color of passion and strength, and the figure in the red robe and red boots warns us not to turn our back on ourselves, but instead to follow our passion and act on what is in our hearts from a place of strength. The staff, which often symbolizes wisdom, or the walking stick, backs up the need to walk with strength and to support one another. And the boots tell us to be ready for some heavy work. The sun and the moon tell us that there may be a fight going on between the dark and the light. And although it may be dark out there, we will be able to navigate well enough to keep moving toward the light. The river symbolizes the river of life. And the rocks in the river, as well as the mountains right up ahead, represent many rocky problems and some big challenges regarding government. But the card urges us to keep moving forward because the ravine points to a narrowing of possibilities as time goes on and we move further down the river. The suit of cups represents emotions, and the stack of cups in the foreground indicate that our feelings and our relationship with the government is at the forefront of the issues in our life. Cups also symbolize dependency, and the gap in the way the cups are stacked symbolizes a gap between those in government and those being governed. It tells of a dependency that was created and that fed many people, but may no longer be working. Since the figure is walking away from us, This symbolizes the very strong possibility that we are beginning to turn our backs on the government. And even though it is nighttime and it's difficult to see clearly in the dark, we are looking for alternatives. Instead of saying the cards seem to be stacked against us, it would be more accurate to say the cups seem to be stacked against us. However, even though the cups are stacked against us in terms of government, that is not the case where the Constitution is concerned. So, and that's something I was really very glad to see. The Three of Cups was drawn here, and the basic message of this card, and this is great. Sometimes it amazes me how accurate the cards are in terms of what they say and their response to the question. So the basic message of this card is, quote, "The best thing in life is togetherness, characterized by independence within a group." The best thing in life is togetherness, characterized by independence within a group. I thought that was a very apt way to express the value and the feeling generated by our Constitution. When you look at this card, you see three dancing women with cups raised in celebration, or perhaps tribute to something. Their hair is pulled back and is woven with flowers and fronds from nature. And one of them is holding some kind of fruit. And on the ground around their feet are the fruits of a very bountiful harvest. They are wearing robes of red, beige, and white, even though the white doesn't look very white. And the sky above is a light blue. So the Three of Cups has many rich meanings that include the need to address body, mind, and soul. The beige robe symbolizes the body, the white robe indicates the mind, and the red robe represents the soul. So this card is sometimes said to represent the three graces. The three graces are humor, elegance, and beauty. And this card sometimes represents the Great Mother, who's the source of abundance, and it symbolizes the power of the female in general. Since we are talking about our Constitution, which symbolizes freedom from being ruled by others, this card is perfect because freedom is usually represented by the female principle. The hair is pulled back on the three women, and that symbolizes thought that has been pulled back and out of the way of the eyes in order to afford clear vision. Okay, thinking is not getting in the way of what we're seeing. That's what that symbolizes. And the flowers from nature woven through the hair tell us that now not only is our thinking woven with an appreciation of nature, we are beginning to acknowledge the true nature of ourselves and the life that we hope will flower in terms of life here on Mother Earth. The Three of Cups is sometimes known as the Lord of Abundance, and it's a card that celebrates community and the enjoyment of life in community, especially when each individual takes personal responsibility for self-governance, which reduces the need for kings and power brokers. So the Three of Cups is often seen as symbolizing a great opportunity of some kind while warning of great danger at the same time. The opportunity here is the freedom to govern ourselves. And since this is a card of boundaries, the danger being warned about is that this freedom to be self-governing can only be maintained as long as boundaries and rights are honored and, quote, a we feeling is not allowed to swallow the individual. A we feeling is not allowed to swallow the individual. This card urges us to make our limits plainly understood. And this hints about the problem of socialism, which seeks to make the group more important than the individual. Keywords for the Three of Cups are liveliness, group effort, feelings, womb, joining together, fluid, adaptable, roots, instability, protection, gain, reunions, resolution of difficulties, abundance, and instinct. The light blue sky calls for clarity and lightness of heart, and the harvest at the feet of the women represents an abundant harvest waiting for us. So together, the Eight of Cups and the Three of Cups tell us that while we may end up searching for a new form of government, we have not abandoned our Constitution and the self-governance it stands for. So, in closing, I chose an animal card, again, to represent the perfect totem for us over the month of September, and it was the giraffe card. The gift of the giraffe is farsightedness year-round. Farsightedness year-round. And there are a couple of things to note about this animal. First is how tall it is. Whoa. This height bestows the ability to see very long distances and thus foresee coming events. Next is its neck, which has some powerful symbolism. The neck represents a bridge between the power of the body to act and the power of the head to direct that action. It represents a need to decide whether or not we're going to stick our neck out and stand for something. The neck is also associated with expression and communication. And the question that comes up here is, are you allowing others to speak inappropriately for you? The giraffe has some very, very long, thin legs. And legs represent the stand we take in life. I think I said that earlier in one of the cards here. But legs are the symbol of balance and the ability to progress, to move forward, and to move forward quickly. The questions that come up here are you standing still because you're afraid of the future? Are you resisting change and refusing to move forward? The giraffe can show us the future and how best to move toward it. The giraffe is the most vulnerable when it's trying to get a drink of water. The warning from the giraffe, who must seriously spread out its legs and stretch its neck downward in order to get that drink of water, is that we will be the most vulnerable if we move our sights away from the horizon for any great length of time. So that's the end. Let's summarize what we've covered in this tarot. Number one, how are people thinking, feeling, and seeing, and what would be most helpful for us to understand about ourselves? And the card drawn was the Devil card, which says that we are being tossed around on the horns of a major dilemma that must be faced. We must stop feeling like abandoned children and realize the need to face our situation. We are not captives, and we are not chained to any particular system. It is up to us to remove the chains of old beliefs and habits. We are charged with remembering how to fly and to evolve ourselves, reshaping and refashioning our primordial nature from within, transformation within. Question number two, what can we expect regarding our money and our financial system? And the card here was the Ten of Swords, a card that represents the launch of something, our money and financial system, into a new dimension of existence. Surprise, surprise. This card also tells us that we are about to face the results of our thoughts and fears around money, as well as an attitude of betrayal. And that this situation will be a culmination of injurious thoughts and attitudes. And probably some of those injurious thoughts are by us, and some will be by the powers that want to be. So the 10 of Swords is known as the Lord of Ruin. However, it carries a hidden blessing that only becomes apparent after the situation is dealt with. We are tasked with assessing the situation and assembling a new picture of possibilities in a world of our own making. And question number 3, what do we need to see regarding our government and our Constitution? And this brought 2 cards, the 8 of Cups and the 3 of Cups. The 8 of Cups seems to be a theme for a lot of issues this year, but its message around government is that we are beginning to turn our backs on the current system. We are walking away. The core message here is to come to terms with our destiny as the first people in history to insist on self-governance and to begin to exercise our influence, our will, when it comes to that governance. The 3 of Cups tells us that we have certainly not given up on our Constitution and that it represents togetherness characterized by independence within a group, as well as freedom, as long as a we feeling is not allowed to swallow the individual, as socialist systems tend to do. And lastly, I drew the giraffe card as the animal totem for the month of September. The giraffe represents far-sightedness year-round. In other words, it speaks of the ability and the need to keep our eyes on the horizon in order to see what's coming our way. The long neck of the giraffe symbolizes the need to stick our necks out to create a bridge between what we are dealing with today and the world we envision living in tomorrow. So that's it for this month. I hope the questions asked and the cards drawn will bring a bit of clarity. And I hope you'll have some new things to think about regarding ourselves, our money, and our government. Thank you so much for listening and have a wonderful month. Take care.